ESG. It's one of those things that, thanks to James and others, is finally getting into the brains of people on the right. But for the longest time, we didn't know it existed. And most normal people, normie norms I call them, still don't understand it exists. And what I still have never fully wrapped my brain around, and I'm sure James is going to explain it to me, is why corporate America would ever allow such poison into its boardroom to begin with. So let's get right to it. Joining me now, my friend James Lindsay, author of actually many great books, but this one, The Marxification of Education. And he also authored Race Marxism. That might be my favorite. Anyway, James, ESG. Does nothing for my bottom line. If I'm a CEO, COO, I'm sitting in a boardroom, I would like a nice fat bonus check for about $15 million at the end of the year. Why would I ever in a million years sign on to ESG insanity? It makes no sense.
Well, you have a couple of mistakes there in what you just said. The thing is, it does do something to your bottom line. It will probably lower your bottom line. So in that sense, it is insanity to sign on, but you actually tapped into the key reason why the boardrooms are signing on to these ESG things. Now, there are lots of these, mechanisms that the big financiers like BlackRock and Vanguard, the coordinators like World Economic Forum are using to pressure corporations to do this. But the more prosaic, simple reason is that there are incentive structures where the corporate heads, the board members, the C-suite, are getting big fat bonus checks when they are compliant, and they do not get big fat bonus checks when they are not compliant.
Okay, now I know we're getting down into the details, but explain that to me, James. Doesn't the C-suite decide which bonus checks get sent out and which ones don't?
Yes, they do, but they care very much about their ESG score and their ability to participate in the financial market with a ESG listed index fund or something like this. And the only way to get those is to have the correct, according to these kind of, whether it's BlackRock or World Economic Forum, which are not terribly distinct entities, they are going to decide what good corporate governance looks like. That's the G in ESG, governance. And so having policies that give executives bonuses for implementing ESG policy is good governance according to this corrupt system. So the reason that they get to decide to give themselves big fat checks to participate in something that overall hurts their company is because they don't actually get to participate in the big ESG scam unless they do so. And they are being promised good deals down the road if they participate, and bad deals if they don't.
James, I argue, Bud Light's obviously been in the news all over the place, and I argued when it came out that yes, Bud Light's sales would be hurt, probably severely hurt, which we're seeing now. But in the end, Bud Light would be fine because they have made themselves part of the club, kind of just what you alluded to. In the end, they can only fall so far, and eventually they will be bailed out and propped up because they've been good little boys and girls. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
That's more or less it. You see, the mechanism with capitalism, now that it's gone, or capital really, now that it's gone super multinational, these are gigantic multinational conglomerates. You think of Bud Light as a company, and then maybe, most people are now aware that it's actually owned by Anheuser-Busch. So Budweiser, it's not its own company. Anheuser-Busch owns it, but Anheuser-Busch sold out to InBev, which is a Belgian company, about a decade ago. And InBev actually owns dozens and dozens and dozens of brands of beer. So all of these different beers that you think are competing are actually all owned by one giant corporation. And the game that's being played with ESG is to figure out who the good little boys and girls are that are going to get to control the giant conglomerate monopolies that run all of the different industries. And if you play ball, you maybe get to become part of the monopoly club. And if you don't play ball, they'll make sure your industry or your corporation gets crushed.
Okay, so there's this entity or entities obviously above. We're talking Klaus Schwab types that are doing these things, but what's his motivation? What's the head of BlackRock's motivation? Someone at the top is directing these things with a specific motivation. What is it?
Well, Klaus, if you watch some of his older interviews where he's in his study, has a bust of Lenin behind him on the bookshelf. So that's been verified. That's legitimate. So we can guess his motivation is probably to seize lots of power and control. He gives these interviews. He says, in fact, that he wants to transform our economy from one of production and consumption into one of sharing and caring. That sounds very communist. So this is kind of a classic, either corporatist or communist, kind of fused together motivation that's very easy to understand for characters like Klaus. Now, Larry Fink at BlackRock said that markets like totalitarian governments. They like total control. They don't like uncertainty. And that actually gives you the clue as to what they're actually after. These people are after a market that's completely under their control, that benefits them, that gets them richer and richer and disenfranchises everybody else, but also that can't suffer the kinds of disruptions that might buck that system. They need a perfectly smooth and controlled market, which means they need a perfectly smooth and controlled economy and perfectly smooth and controlled consumers and producers and political citizens. So they need an implementation of a gigantic control mechanism to make sure everything goes the way that their little plans organize it to. So that's what it boils down to, Jesse, is just simple totalitarian control over the entire system that happens to dump all the rivers of gold that it produces straight into their pockets.
So has the laziness or failure of the right to boycott, to put its money where its morals are, for lack of a better way to put it, is that one of the reasons this stuff has really taken hold, where we just haven't cared enough to not buy this, not do this, not spend money here? We haven't cared enough. The communists have cared enough, and now they run everything.
Well, what I think we see with Bud Light says that it's a little more complicated than that. It is that we haven't been paying attention, and in fact, that the neocons have been making deals with these people and working with these people and have explicitly been these people for decades and are part of the problem in the program. So the Republican Party is only just barely starting to wake up. Conservatives are only just barely starting to wake up. But if you look at the giant boycott against Bud Light, which has been pretty huge, it's only done a small percentage of damage against InBev's total profits. So that it hasn't really dented them. What it has sent up a gigantic flag that says, wait a minute, people are really unhappy with this. So it matters that it's happening. But in the end of the day, what we're going to have to do is start pointing our efforts at getting antitrust law and other laws that can break up this racketeering cartel that's operating through the financial industry, to start breaking apart these gigantic corporations that have de facto or explicit monopoly power over us. So it's not just about boycotts. It's going to be about getting the political will worked up to put somebody in power who's going to slam the door on these people.
Okay, can that be done at a state level? Because you'll have to forgive me, James, I don't have a whole lot of faith in the federal level, either party.
No, there's no help really at present in the federal level, but there is at the state level. In the states, however, there are only 50 of them, which I know is a big number for some people, but it's a number that's a lot smaller than most numbers. And it turns out that when a state decides to buck the system, or say when 12 states decide to buck the system, that's one of these things that the federal government likes to pretend that it can ignore, but it cannot ignore. Take, for example, a totally tangential subject, but my home state of Tennessee, recently, like many states, passed a bill preventing the transmutilation surgeries and hormone things that they try to call gender-affirming care. And now the Department of Justice is suing the state of Tennessee over this, which means the state took a stand and it turned into a federal issue that's going to get fought out in the courts. And the federal side of it is going to have to respond to what the states do. So in a sense, it's a way to send the message up the chain for the states to take what power they have, put their foot down and say, not in my state. We're not doing this anymore. We're going to force this conversation at higher and higher levels until we get to the highest spot on the chain that we can and break it.
You like what you just saw? Subscribe to the YouTube channel. The First TV has a YouTube channel. It's outstanding. Go hit that subscribe button now.